ST.
Yes, I can go now.
Yes.
And if you don't mind, if I've got the right, I can share the screen. I see I can share the screen.
Yes.
I prepared something which I used at some meeting, a bit of updating just to make sure that we are together. I don't know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can, yes, yes.
Okay, I just don't know. Let me just see if I can. So, just in terms of putting it in perspective, in 2005, we as Zambians came up with the first ever long-term development plan called the Vision 2030. And I'm sure most of you have heard of this vision. And in that vision, we basically expressed ourselves or our aspiration of becoming a prosperous middle-income country. So we did not just want to be a middle-income country, but we wanted to be a prosperous middle-income country. And in order for us to be a prosperous middle-income country, we gave ourselves 7 socio-economic objectives. And the first objective was that we needed to attain and sustain our annual GDP growth of not less than 6% in the first years of implementation of the vision, 8% in the second development plan, 9% in the third development plan, and 10% from 2021 to 2030. Now, I just wanted to say that when we had the vision, I don't know whether that noise is coming from myself.
I'm not sure. Tachila, do you mind muting? Because everybody else is muted except Tachila, I think.
So the vision, we said that this vision 2030 will be operationalized through the development plans. Thank you for that. So we agreed that we are going to operationalize the vision 2030 through the development plans. And because we had the development planning in the 1960s, early 1970s, and we had done 4 development plans, then we could not start from the first development plan. We started from the 5th because we're already counting the 4 that we had done in the 60s, late 60s, and into the 70s. And then through these plans, then we are going to be actualized through the medium-term expenditure frameworks, which are the 3-year rolling budgets. And then in each year, we have the budget that we implement. So of the 7 development objectives that we had in the vision, the first one was that in the first plan of the vision, which was the 5th National Development Plan, we are going to grow the economy by at least 6% per annum. And in the second, which was the 6th National Development Plan, we are going to grow the economy by at least 8% per annum. And in the subsequent plan, which would be the 7th National Development Plan, would grow the economy by at least 9% per annum. And in the subsequent 2 plans that take us to 2030, we would grow the economy by at least 10%. We also then said that we would maintain a moderate inflation of no more than 5%. And that would reduce poverty by headcount to less than 20% of the population. At that time, average poverty was above almost 80%, and we said we would reduce this to 20%. We also gave ourselves that would reduce income inequality as measured by the Gini coefficients to less than 40 or 40%, depending on how you want to describe it. At that time, our income inequality was at 52. And then we said that we are going to provide secure access to safe potable water sources and improved sanitation to 100% of our population. And this meant both in the rural and urban areas. And that we are going to attain education for all, and that we are going to provide equitable access to quality health care to all by the year 2030. So this was our vision. How did we then perform during our vision? So the graph I show there is basically showing you the period for the 5th National Development Plan, which is 2006 to 2010. The 6th National Development Plan that then coincided with this, the revised 6th National Development Plan from 2011 to 2016, and the 7th National Development Plan 2017 to 2021. In the 5th National Development Plan, we talked about macroeconomic stability. And then we said, once we achieve macroeconomic stability, then we'll go into infrastructure development to open up the country in order for us to be able to facilitate trade. And once we do the infrastructure development, our 7th National Development Plan was supposed to focus on human capital and service delivery. Under the 6th National Development Plan, our average economic growth was 6.4% per annum. And our target was to grow the economy by 6%. Under the 7th National Development Plan, our average growth rate was 5.6% per annum. Our target was to grow the economy by 8%. And when we see this graph, in 2015, we had a steep in the growth. So the blue bars are the targets as per the Vision 2030, and the red line is the actual economic growth that we have been recording. So we see that in 2015, economic growth fell. For all of you that may remember, this is the year we had a drought and we resorted to load shedding because we didn't have enough water in our reservoirs to provide electricity. But it was also a year when the copper prices plummeted, and therefore we couldn't get enough from our copper export. And we fell in 2015. Now, in my teachings, I always say that normally we say that a real man or a real woman is seen not from how many times they fall, but from how many times they wake up every time they fall. Now, if I do a comparison, when you look at 2008, we have a dip. The growth in 2007 was 6.2. In 2008, it went down to 5.7, and then it picked up. The challenges that we had in 2015 were almost similar to the challenges we had in 2008. But because we had macroeconomic stability in 2008, we didn't see any very deep deceleration in economic growth. And because we had weaker macroeconomic fundamentals in 2015, we fell, and since then we have been struggling to stand. What do we see going forward? So the blue line up to 2021 preliminary is showing you what is a continuation of what I had shown, where we have 2020 revised as 2.8, negative 2.8 growth. And we see that in 2021, our preliminary figures show that the growth was about 3.3. And then we are projecting going forward that we should have that stability so that our growth should not dip again, but start picking up, and hopefully that on the outer years, we can accelerate. The next graph just shows you how the exchange rate had performed. Again, you remember I talked about macroeconomic stability in the 5th National Development Plan. We had macroeconomic stability with an exchange rate averaging 4.22 per dollar during the 5th National Development Plan. We then we saw some stability in the 6th National Development Plan, and in 2015, we saw a jump from 6.2 kwacha per dollar to 8.6 kwacha per dollar. And since then, the exchange rate has been depreciating, reaching almost 22 kwacha, beyond 22 kwacha per dollar in 2021. It was the same with the inflation. We started with the inflation. We started with the double-digit inflation in 2005. We managed to bring the inflation down. In 2008, again, because of the instability, inflation went to double-digit, but we managed to control it. And we see from 2017, inflation has been going up, and it reached 22.8% in 2021. And this is the inflation that we have seen in 2021, and the highest that we reached was about 24.6%. So the dark green line is the total inflation, the red one is the food inflation, and the light one is the non-food inflation. And we have seen inflation coming down from 24.6%, and in December it was 16.4%. And just 2 days ago, the Central Statistics announced inflation, and it had reduced it to 15. I think it was 15.6%. Now, because of the growth that we expected, the stability that we had under the 5th National Development Plan, which is 2006 to 2010, in 2011, we reached the GDP per capita in Zambia of $1,600. And at $1,600, according to the World Bank classification, we then moved from the poor country category to lower middle income country. And obviously at that time, we are celebrating that now we're a lower middle income country, the position we had aspired to achieve in 2030, and we had started achieving that in 2011. But in 2015, things started changing. In terms of our medium-term macroeconomic target now, we are targeting that we reduce our fiscal deficit to 6.7% of GDP. And that by 2026, this should reduce to 6.4% of GDP. We had reached our fiscal deficit to 11.6% of GDP on a cash basis. We are also saying that we need to maintain our domestic revenues at an average of above 21% of GDP. And that we should contain domestic borrowing to no more than 5.2% so that we don't crowd out the private sector. We are also talking about significantly reducing the expenditures and the VAT arrears and reducing inflation back to the 6 to 8% band that we had wanted to achieve. And that our international reserves should be maintained at least 3 months of import cover to have that buffer. In terms of the reforms that we want to look at going forward, the first issue, first and foremost, we realize that we have got a huge debt overhang. And probably let me put it in perspective for you. In 2011, when we became a lower middle income country, our debt was about $1.8 billion. And our debt service as a percentage of domestic revenues was about 11%. What that means is that per every 100 kwacha that we collect domestically, 11 kwacha was going towards debt service, and the remainder of the money was left for us to do other things, including paying government salaries. And at that time, government salaries were about 50%, 53% of GDP. I mean, of domestic revenues. And we agreed that we should reduce government salaries below 50%. So we managed to reduce the government salaries as a share of domestic revenues to now 43% of GDP, I mean of domestic revenues. However, the borrowing that we undertook between 2011 and now gives us a total debt stock, external debt of over $12 billion and domestic debt of about $6 billion. Because of this debt stock, it means that it will cost us more money to pay back to service this debt, not to pay back, but to pay interest and amortization that falls due. And as we talk now in 2021, instead of paying 11 kwacha per every 100 kwacha that we raise on domestic revenues, in 2021, we started paying 70 kwacha per every 100 kwacha that we raise in domestic revenues to service the debt. And if we add the 43 kwacha per every 100 kwacha that we raise, which we are using to pay government salaries, it meant that for every 100 kwacha we raised, we needed to go to the bank and borrow 13 kwacha to pay debt service and to pay salaries. And because we prioritize so debt service as a constitutional obligation and salary is a statutory obligation, you cannot suspend them. Then we agreed, obviously with the political economy understanding, we agreed that we pay salaries and then we service the debt. So when we paid the 43 kwacha and the 100 kwacha that we raised, when we paid that for salaries, we remained with 57 kwacha and we needed 70 kwacha to pay the debt. And we started cherry picking, who do we pay this? The person who came and made the noise, we paid. Those that did not make noise, we didn't pay because we didn't have the money. And no one was willing to lend us the money. And then we had the debt suspension initiative that then we agreed that we suspend all the debt payment apart from the concession of multilateral lenders. And over that, then the G20 debt framework, common framework for debt treatment came into place, and we applied under the G20 common framework for debt treatment. And under that common framework for debt treatment, then we said that let's bring everyone on the table and we have a discussion. But the G20 put a condition that for us to be able to go through this, we need to have a program with the International Monetary Fund. And most of you are aware that even under the previous regime, there were attempts to have a program with the International Monetary Fund, but those attempts did not materialize. And now when the new government came into place, it was easier, and because we started to discuss afresh, and probably because the politics were behind us. And the first thing the government did was to put up some of the reform agendas. What are these economic reforms that we need to undertake in the medium term? And the slide that I put there are the reform agendas that we agreed to undertake. One is in the agriculture sector, where we said we needed to undertake the FISIP or Farmer Input Support Program reforms. In 2001, 2002, when I just joined the Ministry of Finance as an economist in budget office, we had the Farmer Input Support Program that supported 1 million people, and that costed us 1 billion kwacha. And each of these 1 million people were getting 4 bags of fertilizer peso dressing, 4 bags of fertilizer top dressing, and 2 bags of seeds as the support. We come in 2021, we are still supporting the 1 million Zambians, and none of the people that we have been supporting has ever graduated. But we are still supporting 1 million Zambian. And now in 2021, for instance, the cost of supporting those 1 million Zambians with the same input moved from 1 billion kwacha to 11.5 billion kwacha. So it means that there is hemorrhaging in the FISIP. And the commitment we made was that we are going to reform the FISIP so that it is better targeted and there is less wastage. In the mining, we talked about increased production And the minister in the budget announced of increasing production from under 900,000 tons that we are getting to over 3 million tons in the next 10 years. In the energy sector, we talked about the reform of having a cost-reflective tariff and the reform in the fuel supply chain and procurement. And in the fuel subsector, we talked about removing the subsidy. There are two types of subsidy in the fuel. One is what we call explicit subsidy, and one that we call implicit subsidy. So because the fuel prices were higher than the price, government said, let's remove the taxes in order to push on the fuel prices. And the revenue we are foregoing if we do a tax expenditure on the taxes that we removed on fuel, VAT and excise duty, is about $44 million, $44 million per month. And even after we removed this, we removed the taxes and are foregoing $44 million per month, we still had the difference between the price at which the fuel was coming in and the price at which we are selling it, given the price that government had recommended. And at that time, we are spending about $21 million per month. So in total, we are spending about $67 million per month on fuel subsidy. And the question you ask yourself is, who are the major beneficiaries of this fuel subsidy? 50% of this fuel subsidy go to the mining sector. So basically, we're talking about, out of that $66 million, we are talking about $33 million being a subsidy that we are giving to the mining sector. The other subsidy goes to manufacturing, retail, and trade. And only 2.5% go to the ordinary citizens, you and me. And even that 2.5% that goes to the ordinary citizens, you and me, my mother in the village does not have a vehicle and jumps on a bus, comes into town once in a month, sometimes once in 2 months. And the fee from my village into town is 100 kwacha. If we are saying fuel subsidies 50%, it means that we are subsidizing my mother 50 kwacha. But for me, who's got a vehicle in town, who can afford, I'm using probably 3,000, 4,000 kwacha as my fuel per month. And if we take that subsidy, it means me who's got a vehicle who can afford, I'm receiving a subsidy of 2,000 kwacha, while a poor person that we needed to target for this subsidy is receiving a subsidy of 50 kwacha if they jumped on a bus to come to town, or no subsidy at all if they didn't jump on a bus to come to town, apart from the pass-through effect of probably the fuel into the goods and services that they eat. Most of them, they eat rural goods and services. There's no fuel involved in there. So this is the reform that we said we should undertake. And the reform should be that we look at the fuel supply chain. When we had the UDI, we had the oil in Zimbabwe and everywhere, and we couldn't. We came up with the Indeni. What Indeni does is that you get the finished products in the Far East or wherever you get them. You mix them so that you can import them properly. So you get diesel, jet fuel, paraffin, and petrol. Commingle them, and you bring that in a ship at Tazama. When you reach Tazama, you pump that commingled product that comes to Ndola at Indeni. Then Indeni separates, diesel goes one side, petrol goes one side, jet fuel goes one side, and paraffin goes one side. Now, whatever mathematics we do, there is no way that fuel would be cheaper than the fuel that comes already separated. In order for us to get crude oil to process, we needed a hydrocarbon cracker. And the hydrocarbon cracker at that time was costing about $350 million. Probably now it's $700 million. But even if we brought that hydrocarbon cracker, the demand that we have in Zambia for Indeni should increase 10 times for it to have the economies of scale and to be able to produce at a normal price. And the question is, do we need to continue with this method of fuel procurement? Or we should bring the finished product, bring the diesel, pump it into the Tazama pipeline and have it at Indeni and process it. Bring the petrol probably by road if it cannot come through the pipeline and go through those separations. And those are the reforms that we are saying we should undertake. In the electricity subsector, we are talking about cost-reflective tariffs. The cost of producing electricity today, average cost, is about 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And once we produce it at about 11 cents per kilowatt hour on average, ZESCO sells it at 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And the question is, who is bearing that difference? Again, the mining companies consume about 50% of this electricity. So it means 50% of the subsidy goes to the mining. The poor Zambians, most of them do not have electricity. Those that have got electricity, about 2.5, if I'm not mistaken, or 5%. So do we spend $400, $500 million on an annual basis to subsidize electricity, $200 million of which is going to the mining sector, and only $2.5 million is going to the poor people that we intend to subsidize? Or do we say that we remove these subsidies and identify these 2.5, 2 billion, 1 million, 2 million Zambians that we need to subsidize and give them the subsidy directly? So it is a question of targeting, and these are the reforms that we're talking about carrying going forward. On the fiscal side, we are talking about enhancing resource mobilization, but also promoting investment and trade, because the only way we can grow this country is by promoting investment and trade. And this is why on the fiscal side, we reduce the company income tax from 30%, from 35% to 30%. On the mining sector, because we are talking about expanding the mineral production, whatever calculation you do, I am a fiscal expert. I have gone through these numbers. People who talk about illicit flows, companies lying. You put a straight line Excel spreadsheet. When you are producing 800, 900,000 tons, and you put the mineral royalty at 6% or 10%, and put the company income tax at 30%, you are not going to get more than $1 billion as taxes. But if we are to increase the production to $1.2 billion, 2 million tons, 1.5 million tons, that taxes that we get at the same rate that we are producing would be between $2 billion and $4 billion, depending on the price of copper on the international market. And this is why we are talking about, instead of having double taxation, remove the mineral royalty tax and remove the export duty on maize, so that we can be able to have people that grow the maize, and when we have got excess, it can be exported. The challenge we have with the flip-flop type of policies is that if today we say everyone grows maize, there's an export in Congo DR. Everyone grows the maize at the time of harvest, then we put an export ban. Then the people that grow the maize lose out. Even if we lift that ban next year, the people that were supposed to grow the maize, they will be saying, what if there's an export ban, I will lose again, and therefore they want to grow the maize. And this is why we need this policy consistency so that that can be done. Then we talked about strengthening accountability and transparency in the public financial management, especially in the government procurement system. Almost 10 to 15% of GDP goes through the government procurement system. And if we were to increase and improve government procurement system, all these challenges that we are talking about, corruption that we are talking about, we think we can eliminate them. Then other key reforms we talked about increased decentralization. In 2016, the constitution was amended, and in the constitution, we are talking about decentralization. And we're talking about decentralization by devolution. And therefore, we said that we need to increase this decentralization. From 2011, we have been talking about the decentralization policy, the decentralization secretariat. We have never moved. And we said, can we now move and increase the decentralization? And then we said, given the situation we have, the tigers of East Asia that we talk about became the tigers because of education. And therefore, we made a deliberate policy that we should support the education and the health sector so that we can have educated and healthy people that will be productive. The World Bank research shows that we have got almost 40% of stuntedness in Zambia. And at that level, we are among the 10 most stunted countries in Africa and among the 17 most stunted countries in the world. And you know that with the stuntedness, there is retardation and it affects productivity. And this is why we are talking about investing in social protection to make sure that those people that have poverty, that have got nutrition challenges, and in order to avoid this stuntedness, we should be able to give them some social protection. If money was there, I would even be saying that let's have a meal in every primary school at least per day to make sure that the children have got a balanced diet and we fight this stuntedness. So why decentralization? The first part, the legal provision I talked about, Article 151 of the Constitution that talks about local government system, and it provides for the functions, it provides for need to build the capacity in local government system, it provides for sound financial base to be established, accountability, and the right of local authorities to manage their affairs and to be to form partnerships and networks with associations and to assist in every way that we want to be assisted. And this is the fulfillment. So when you ask a question, why decentralization? Why are we taking money? This is what we agreed in 2016 under Article 151 of the Constitution. Other considerations. When you look at decentralization in Zambia, it stems from the need for the citizens to exercise control of their own local affairs and to foster meaningful development. Literature shows that decentralization, if properly managed, can lead to efficient and effective delivery of services. I have given this example before in my teachings, and I'll give this example to you colleagues. In 2004, we put money in the budget when I was in budget office, 500 million kwacha for us to do a sugar plantation in Luapula province. And in April of 2004, Minister of Agriculture came to us and requested for that 500 million to be paid at once because the money was needed so that the plantation can start moving. And we released that money. In July 2004, Honorable Mutati was the Deputy Minister of Finance, and I was leading the revenue side in the budget. We went to Luapula on the post-budget meetings. And when we reached Luapula, we asked how far they had gone with the sugar plantation for which we had released the 500 million. The people in Luapula told us that they only had received 184 million out of the 500 million we gave to Minister of Agriculture. And then we called the Minister of Agriculture why they didn't release the money to Luapula. Minister of Agriculture told us they didn't release the money because they were fearing that if they release the money, it will be abused. So they wanted to release the first tranche. If it is not abused, they release the next money. Meanwhile, they came and collected all the money from the Treasury. And then we said, okay, no problem. We'll follow up with the balance with the Minister of Agriculture. Tell us what you have done with the 184 million that we brought to you. They told us that they took a study tour to Mazabuka Sugar to learn how to do sugar. So the entire $500 million kwacha was released in 2004. Nothing was happened on the ground. And because the money grew legs in between, no one could follow. And you can imagine if we had released that money to Luapula and asked the people of Luapula to make a decision on that sugar plantation, I'm sure by today we would have had that plantation. So in my view, this is the reason we need decentralization. And because the people at the local level have got the information, so the local governments have an informed advantage over central government, as it is less costly for them to acquire information on preferences and production costs. Local governments are more accountable to local recipients of public sources. If this money that I talked about had gone to the province, there is no way those people in the province would have used 184 million kwacha to go to Mazabuka to learn about sugar plantation. It didn't cost 184 million kwacha, even if they were to go. Probably the people would have said, okay, out of this 184 million kwacha, use 10 million kwacha, the rest of the money let's use for sugar plantation. But the people on the ground did not know. And when the people on the ground were asking why the sugar plantation was not developed, they were told that Minister of Finance did not release the money. But more importantly, when you read the literature, policymakers and researchers alike consider decentralization in China and India to be the determinant of their recent economic success. And we think that that would help us. What do we want to do in this decentralization? We want to take more functions and resources to the lower levels of government. We want to use fiscal decentralization pillars of expenditure assignment. What normally has been happening is that we give the local authorities the expenditure assignments, but we don't give them the matching revenues. So we are now talking about expenditure assignments, revenue assignments, borrowing assignments, so that they determine that within the framework, and that we should give some transfers for equalization and under what we call intergovernmental transfers. And we are now talking about the fifth pillar of human resource development as a new pillar. Everyone today will tell you there's no capacity at the local authorities. And I ask, what is the capacity at the central government? And we can develop this capacity. And this is the agenda we have, that we can develop this capacity. And what will this be included? Because the devolution is lagging behind. We didn't want to lag behind and wait until we finish the devolution. And this is why we talked about the Intergovernmental Equalization Fund, the Constituency Development Fund, and the grants in lieu of rates. And my colleague Mshanga will talk about the nitty-gritties at the community level of the Constituency Development Fund. But I just want to say that because we have the Constituency Development Fund Act, and we thought we could use this, instead of us waiting until we have got all the pieces of the devolution that we are looking for, we thought we could start with the Constituency Development Fund. Why do we want to go the Constituency Development Fund? There is already an establishment under the CDF Act, and Member of Parliament and constituency communities have an opportunity to make their own choices and implement projects that maximize their welfare. I have been told that in one of the provinces, one of the districts in Western Province, for 6 years, a school had the roofs blown off. And for 6 years, the roofs have never been replaced. It means we have got an asset that is idle for 6 years. And when it is rainy season, the children stop going to school because there's nowhere they can sit. And you ask yourself, how much will it cost us to replace those roofs? But under the current arrangement, before this decentralization, someone would have to write to the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Education here in Lusaka to send the money to that district for the roof to be replaced. If you are lucky, the permanent secretary will respond. If you are not lucky, the permanent secretary will not respond. But now we are saying that when there is such a situation, let the community decide that the money they have, they replace the roof so that the children can go to school. If there is a bridge blown off, let the community decide that they replace that bridge. And so it is the community that make a decision, spearheaded by the area member of parliament. Remember, we talked about the Vision 2030 of having education for all, of having quality water and sewerage system for all. And we think with this money that we are putting to the local authorities, to the communities, that we are going to prioritize water and sanitation. And that probably in the next 2-3 years, we should never have a public government school or a public place, a clinic, or any public place, an agricultural center that does not have running water, that does not have flush toilets. Now we have got technology where we can put solar systems. Every public school should have running water and flush toilets. And then we go and start saying, now that we have got every public school with running water and flush toilets, can we now talk about the distances between the public schools, and we start building new public schools to reduce the distance of the children that they will be covering? I used to cover 16 kilometers every day to go to school and back. And most of the people in my area, even me, if my father was not a harsh man, probably I would not have been what I am today, because I would not have gone to school. But I went to school because if I didn't go to school, my father would beat me. But most of the people that I come from the same area with, they never went to school. The only time they went to school was during the farming season, because they didn't want to go to the fields to farm. And therefore, we think that this is the right way to go. This is just a spreadsheet that shows how much money we have been releasing towards decentralization. And now to show you that in 2022, we are going to release about 25.7 million per constituency when they are ready for that release. And we have put in that we should have some accountability in accordance with Public Financial Management Act number 1 of 2018. And this act talks about fiscal discipline, prudence, equity, and transparency. And that from the central government, any abrogation of the provision of this act shall attract necessary rigor, and these are the safeguards we are putting in. And we are talking about controlling officers that will be expected to be familiar with the roles and responsibilities and the judiciary duties that they go with. And now we are talking about the decentralization that have got basically three components, and I'm sure Mshanga is going to talk about them. The community fund itself, the youth fund, and the women fund as one, and then the bursaries. In those days, for someone to get a bursary, if they need a bursary, they needed to come to the bursaries in Lusaka, and probably the PS or the Secretary of Bursaries Committee makes a decision. We are now saying that the community themselves should make a decision. If there is a child who cannot afford to go to school, the community will make a decision and use part of that money to take that child to school in the community where they are coming from. It therefore means that when my child wants to go to school and a child from the community wants to go to school, bursaries will not choose my child, because that time it was my child who got bursaries because I could talk to the secretary to the bursaries committee. Now it will be the community that will choose who goes to school, and they will use that money because that is community money. And I'm sure that when you call for a town hall meeting, every community will come and attend that town hall meeting. What are our expectations? Our expectations is that this CDF is going to promote transparency and accountability, is going to promote efficiency and effectiveness in the utilization of resources. It is going to promote efficient production of financial reports. management of and control of public assets, equity and quality, and value for money for the product that we are going to be getting. What is the commitment that the Minister of Finance has made? First is that we are going to make these funds available. We have got the money in the budget and we'll make it available. Two is that we are going to conduct audits to make sure that this money is used for the purpose it is intended to. And the proposal we are making is that once the CDF and everything is established, we will release the CDF money for the first quarter. So a quarter of the CDF money will be released. And on a monthly basis, those that who have spent that money will get it on a reimbursable basis. And we are committed to providing the technical support to the districts to make sure that this works. We have identified, for instance, that there are some pieces of legislation that are in conflict with the intention. The CDF Act talks about a member of parliament appointing everyone that should sit on the CDF committee. We want this to be independent. And we are committed to amending the law so that we can be talking about a church representative and the churches around the constituents decide who their representative should be. If we talk on an NGO representative, the NGO in the constituencies decide who their representative should be, so that we depoliticize this CDF and it goes for development. The second challenge we have is that when we talked about the youth fund and the women fund, we wanted a revolving fund. So the government gives a grant to the women. The women form cooperatives and they use this money to borrow and lend to each other's chirimba. So if one benefits today, the day they pay back, another one benefits, another one benefits. And through that, as it is working, we are looking at providing seed money to increase this. The CDF Act now says we give a grant. And I'm asking myself, even if we give 25 million kwacha, in Mandeko alone, there are more than 80,000 people. If we give a grant, who do we give this grant? And the Act says we cannot do that, Chirimba, we give a grant. And these are some of the weaknesses in the Act that we are looking and will be able to amend so that the women, when the president went to Kamala, the women of Kamala said, Mr. President, we are not looking for free money. We are looking for seed money. We know how to do Chirimba on our own. And once we get this seed money, instead of us going to get expensive money, each one of us can borrow from this money and build the business. And we know how to make sure that our people pay for this money. And we hope that this can work. We are also looking at introducing a capital grant to the local authorities. We are in discussion with the World Bank to get a decentralization project ongoing and get $100 million from there. Use $20 million to build the capacity for the local authorities and use $80 million to give them capital grant so that the local authorities do not only depend on this decentralization, but they look at this. In the water and sanitation sector, we are also in discussion with the World Bank to see how we can leverage this decentralization. Most of you, especially those that come from Central Province, we have seen about 509 kilometers of road network in the rural areas has been done under the World Bank project, which is talking about increasing access to the rural areas, talk about trade. And we want to complement that by also using some World Bank money to leverage the CDF money in order to provide quality safe water and sanitation facilities in public places. And we are hoping that by the next 2-3 years, we can proudly say there is no school in Zambia that has got what we are calling VIP toilets. but every school in Zambia would have a flush toilet and will have running water. That every clinic in Zambia will have at least an extension of one room, which is a maternity wing with beds and with equipment to deliver women unless their complicated cases are to be referred. And we are sure that if we work together, we can be able to achieve this. Let me conclude and say that we had a dream in 2025 and 2005 of becoming a lower middle income country by 2030. We are in 2011, we became a lower middle income country. As we talk now, our GDP per capita has reduced from $1,600 to $1,053. It means we have gone back to a lower middle income country. It means we are not consistent in our growth. What we need is consistency. And I'm sure that working together, giving power to the people through decentralization, we can be able to achieve our vision 2030. Probably not in 2030, probably in 2035 or 2040. But at least we can start having clean drinking water, education for all, and health for all in the probably next 2 or 3 years if we work together. Let me end here and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Nkulukusa. That was very nice, man. Yeah, I really enjoyed the quite a lecture because you covered a lot of ground. And just in summary, for people that joined late, today's program is talking about the CDF, Constituency Development Fund. And we're very fortunate to have Felix, who's the Secretary to the Treasury, come in and join us and talk about the vision that they have from the central government. And it's going to be followed up by Mr. Stephen Mushanga, who's Penta 88, and he's going to talk about the management of the CDF on the ground. But Felix, if you don't mind, I'll just sort of summarize what you said. And I like how you approach it from the big, like a funnel. So you gave us a big picture and came all the way down to the things that we could do, individually. So with the Vision 2030, which is only 8 years out from now, we have a lot of expectations from you guys. But Felix has explained that they approach this vision from the unequitable distribution of resources in the country, especially subsidies. So they're trying to fix that. And he gave some examples about areas where this can actually happen. One example is the Indeni separator and how it functions, the ZESCO subsidies. And one way to do that is to micro-target how resources are given to the individual communities and whatnot. Within that, they are going to focus on government procurement systems, making sure that works better. But that has to come through decentralization. And with decentralization, most people are concerned about, bread and butter issues like education and health. So there's a lot of money being pumped into that area as well. And that's the mechanism that Mushanga is going to talk about in the CDF component. But with that comes a lot of trust in the people. So there's going to be, I guess, capacity building to build up that trust, to build up the mechanism for people to actually apply for the money, use the money, and report how the money was used and all that stuff. And then Felix, you spoke about how parents are important, to the development of children. So when parents are involved, as your father was, obviously, they become agents of change because they know there's going to be money that is going to help their little ones, and the stress is taken away from them. So it makes it easier for them to educate their kids. But to do all that stuff, the parents have to be assured of transparency in the system. so that people like you and me are not over benefiting from these resources. Last but not least, you spoke about oversight. So obviously, for a program like this, there's going to be technical support that's given, and we wish you guys luck. Giving this technical support. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, but with persistence, I'm sure it will work. So overall, I enjoyed this presentation a lot. I don't know if you guys have any questions for ST Nkulukusa. He left a meeting to come and join us here, so we don't want to hold him too long. But Hastings Chui has a question.
Thank you so much. And I also wish to thank the presenter, Felix. It has been a very enlightening presentation. I like it because a number of issues came out. But I've got 3 questions that I wish to put across. The first question, if I got you correctly, is that you're looking at the growth rates of 3.3 in 2021, 2022, up to about 3.9 in 2024. Isn't that small? I mean, in terms of looking at where we are and where we want to go, can't we think big? Maybe talking about growth rates of 5% in 2024, something like that. The second question I have is that you've mentioned that the CDF will be released quarterly, if I got you correctly. Again, I'm asking why you cannot release 100%, because some projects, when they start, they need that motivation, that enthusiasm, that energy, the drive. So if you fund a constituency, just say the first quarter, and the people in the constituency have the drive to complete a project, it means they will have to wait maybe for 2 months again to receive the next quarter funding. That perhaps kills the drive in the constituency. The third question I think I'd like to ask is to do with the changing of the law. I think you mentioned that, for instance, the current law gives the power to the MP to choose who sits on those committees, if I got you correctly. So when is this law going to be changed? Because I think very soon you start funding these constituencies. So I would want to believe that this law should be in place before the actual implementation in the constituencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Probably I can respond to those 3, and then we can come to the next one. The growth rates are too low. Can we think big? Yeah, of course, our dream is that they should grow big. But when we put the macroeconomic factors and fundamentals in place, first and foremost, we have a debt hang. We are now in the process of negotiating for debt restructuring. And even when we look at the landing zones in the negotiation for debt restructuring, our debt to revenue ratio is about 23%. We need to reduce that to 14% for us to be sustainable. So first, we have to struggle with making sure that we become debt sustainable. And once we become debt sustainable, then we have to make sure then that we point the resources to the growth. Can we reduce our debt to GDP to revenue ratio from 23% to 14%? Obviously, the landing zone is too high. It means we need to ask for very high cuts in the debt forgiveness. Will we be forgiven that debt if we ask for very high cuts? It depends. When we look at the macroeconomic fundamentals, we look at our fiscal positions, we look at our arrears, for instance. In the road sector alone, we have got contracts worth 127 billion kwacha. And yet our budget per year is about 3.9 billion kwacha. If today we are to say, let us just pay those road contracts with whom we have got a budget, it will take us not less than 43 years. Even if we say, let's cancel those and just pay those that have already given us the certificate, we have got over 40 billion in the road sector alone. If I bring in other sectors, we have got more than 76 billion kwacha that we need to pay. Now, some of these are Zambians. One of them is a former St. Paul's colleague that was given a road to do, and he has not been paid anything, and the house is going for grabs. Would we find money to service those? Because we need to service them and find enough resources to grow beyond the 3 of the 4% that we are targeting in the medium term. Probably, in my view, is that we need to have growth that is coming from internal demand. And we need to fix this problem so that when we start growing together. Remember, I was talking about reducing the income inequality in Zambia, which was at 52% in 2005, and we said we reduce it to 40%. As I talk now, the income inequality in Zambia is at 56%. Instead of dropping, it is going up. And Zambia is the number 4th most unequal country in the world. Number 1 is South Africa, of course. So that is the challenge we have. If we overlook some of these things, we may have enclave growth and not inclusive growth. But we want to have inclusive growth by addressing the structural challenges first so that we can start growing. And this is why we are looking at these moderate numbers so that we most of the resources are going to address these structural challenges we have. Can we release the CDF 100%? When we make a budget, so we have got a budget of say 73 billion. It's not that the Ministry of Finance has got that money today. We are also looking at how many vehicles do we think will be imported in January? How much goods do you think will be consumed in January, and what VAT are we going to get? And it is on a month-by-month basis up to December. So we don't have the money today for us to be able to release that money. But even if we had the money today and we release that money, I suppose that money will go into a commercial bank, isn't it? And do we think that there will be a constituency that will consume 25 million in a month? I don't think some of the constituents will even consume it in a year. But if we release today and it goes in the commercial bank, I am sure because the commercial banks know that the constituents won't consume that money. The commercial banks will come and buy government paper and they will be making profit on government money. Because we have locked up this money, we have to go and borrow money to do something through government paper. And the commercial bank that have got this money will get this. And this is why we are saying, even if someone is building a school, they will start with a foundation. So if the school costs 25 million and it will take the whole year, the foundation probably will take 3 months. And the foundation probably will cost 20 million. So we are saying, can we give a 20 million? And when they are ready, the foundation, they are finished and they want to go to the next stage and they give us that, then we will reimburse it. So our proposal is that we give the 3 months and on a monthly basis, not wait for another 3 months, but on a monthly basis, depending on the burning ratio, those that have consumed the money we have given them, we start reimbursing them. Those that have not consumed, we wait instead of them getting money to go and put in a commercial bank, and the commercial bank starts lending that money to the government and making a profit on it. Can we change the law? When are we going to change the law? We wanted to change the law immediately, but the process of changing the law, unfortunately, it means it includes consultation. Should we wait until we finish those consultations before we change the law? We thought we shouldn't wait until we finish those consultations. So we said, let's start with what we have now. Let's have those constituency development committees formed by the members of parliament. But as we are progressing, we are hoping that the law can be changed. And during the current sitting of parliament, we can present the bill and it goes for first reading, it goes to the committee, and the next sitting of the parliament, probably we can then finalize that law and we can bring these changes that, that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ST. Onward, you have a question. You're muted, Onward. Onward, you're muted. Unmute yourself, then ask your question, man.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, boss.
Yeah. The ST explained a lot of things, and I believe in the change of governance. Those are some of the things that I always look at for Zambia to develop. And he has talked about fiscal discipline, the prudence, equity, and transparency. And we have this challenge because the control officers are always up there. They are not in the constituencies. The constituencies are managed by councillors, and sometimes they don't have this support. Yeah, and we have these challenges where development might not reach the villages as he has said that he longs, and or the government of the day longs to reach down to people who are in the villages. But one thing also that I believe in is that those of us who came from the village, like him, is to go back and be able to be part of the constituency in providing and education to those people who are there. We have this challenge because people don't know what is going on. They know that, I mean, even now people are celebrating to say 25.7 is a lot of money. People are celebrating, but they don't know how it is going to be used because most of them are not part of, they can't come into the meeting. So we need people who would also go back to the same constituencies. Even if we are educated, we can't stay in Lusaka or Mansa or anywhere where we are. We need to participate where we have come from. People need to treasure that the ST came from this village and is contributing. Is coming back to contribute in the things that about development. Even if you are not part of really part into control, but you are there to speak in meetings and be able to educate people. I think that would be a very big milestone that we can get. But the transparency also is, like you talked of an example where money was released, people don't know, and other people on the top plan and say, okay, we'll go to sugar company and to Zambia Sugar Company and lay. And also the other thing that I always get pissed off is where people are robbed of money and the same people can't claim for it because they are not really educated. They can't present themselves. So we will still wait and say, oh, well, they have stolen, but they are in court. I want a situation where if things are given to the constituents, the control officers can be put into task by the same people that they represent in constituencies. I think that's my contribution. Anyway, thank you very much.
Felix, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can comment on it. First and foremost, we are talking about decentralization, and the control of that money will not be at the center. It won't be here. It will be in the local authorities. So the fund managers will be the local authorities. The people that make decisions on how that money will be used the community development officer, the CDF committees. So one of the requirements is that each constituency needed to have the CDF committees. And in these CDF committees, and we have got a requirement that this information is given to the churches, to the schools, to the village headmen that would be able to spearhead this. From the Ministry of Finance point of view, once we have this, we are now preparing the guidelines on how this money should be accounted for and the internal controls that need to be undertaken. And we did this when we released the first grants to the schools. We partnered with the Accountable Governance for Improved Service Delivery, which is a USAID funded project on which I was a consultant when I was still in the consulting world. And we did pilot projects on teaching public financial management systems to non-public financial workers like teachers. And we now are going to help these constituent development committees with the local authorities on how to the processes of this constituent development fund. And when this is done, there will be a requirement for the constituencies to have the ward development committees, the meetings at the ward development committees. So the proposals will be coming from the ward development committees. These ward development committees will submit the proposal to the constituency development, to the constituency committee. And this constituency committee then puts all these proposals together from the different wards. And there is a meeting where they choose which project they take ahead. So the design of the project is a bottom-up approach and not the top-down approach. Decisions will be made by the communities. The communities then take up that matter to the Constituent Development Committee of the projects they want to be undertaken in that constituency. The Constituent Development Committee then helps to prepare those projects. And the fund managers for the constituency fund are the local authorities. So no central controlling, but at the local level. And the job that we have given ourselves is to help so that this system works. Because if it fails, we all fail. If it works, we all work. And we want to help to make sure that it works. Probably by hand-holding in the first instance, or identifying some of the constituents that we can handhold if we can go to every constituency. I'm talking already with the FCDO, the British government. They have got some resources under the Growth International Center that are helping me collect the data, putting it together, doing the evaluation, seeing the capacity data in some of these constituents, and identifying the gaps through which we can then be able to say, what type of help can we give? So we think that it is something that can work. But like I said, when I was presenting this concept at the first time to the president, I told him, when we started working, all of us fell with our first step. But we didn't give up. We stood up until we managed to walk. Later on, we managed to run. Now we can manage to ride a bicycle and even to drive a vehicle. So it is a learning curve that we have to go through. We shouldn't expect that it will be rosy from the beginning. We may have some bumps. What will be important is the commitment. And for me, one of the reasons why I even spared time for this, not just because I'm a St. Paul's person and therefore I should be with you colleagues, but I think that through you colleagues, we can take this message in our different areas and have, at least in the areas where we come from, have this Constituent Development Fund work, and we become the ambassadors of this change. I thank you.
Thank you so much, ST. We have two hands, so we'll go with Finzi first, and then Dr. Saidi.
Thank you, Chair. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, boss.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, ST. Afternoon as well. I think mine is just, I just want to try and reconcile ST's position. he mentioned something about reducing our debt to revenue ratio to about, is it 14% to about 13% from the current, that is just above 20. And he also talked, so that means some form of debt consolidation. Now, this policy is saying obviously an increase in funding in terms of CDF, and in the 2022 budget, it's been projected that obviously domestic financing in terms of what needs to be raised outside revenue is about 24 billion. Now, and that will be raised from government domestic borrowing. So that's an increase. Now, mine is just if we are going to, it looks like we have an expansionary budget. So how do we reconcile that with debt consolidation? I mean, how are we envisioning us getting to a debt service ratio of 14 when on the other side we are carrying out an expansionary budget? So I just wanted to find out from him how that is reconciled, and also if this funding, CDF funding, is will be running. Is it something that we're seeing that will be running going forward on a consistent basis, or we're assuming that at some point government will have to reduce this funding? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Finzi. ST, back to you.
Thank you very much. So there are two things that we are talking here. Debt service, the money that we spend on servicing the debt as a share of domestic revenues is what I said is at 23% now. And for us to be sustainable, that figure should reduce to 14%. When you are 14%, then you are sustainable. And this is the medium-term objective that we want to achieve. We need to be debt sustainable. That's point number one. Point number two is that as we are doing this, as we are undertaking these reforms, normally they say where the two elephants are suffering is the grass that suffers, where the two elephants are fighting. As we are undertaking these reforms, we know that the poor people are the ones that are vulnerable. And therefore, we are tailoring the budget from the old way of doing things, of wastage, rationalizing it, and targeting social protection, education, and health. So we are basically rationalizing the expenditures. Are we undertaking an expansionary budget? No. We are reducing our borrowing from about, I think last year it was almost 13%. We are reducing that borrowing, and we are saying we want to limit it to 6.5%. We are increasing our domestic revenues, and we are reducing our expenditure. So what we are doing is fiscal consolidation and not fiscal expansion. So we are consolidating. If the revenues were to grow higher than that, and we finance from our revenues, that will be very good. But obviously, we don't need to increase the borrowing in order to increase our budget. We need to consolidate. The CDF funding. So instead of us putting money in the Ministry of Education to be used when a roof is blown off in Munchenje, in Mungule, where I come from, we have removed that money from Ministry of Education and have put it in Mungule, Munchenje, so that when the roof is blown off, it is done there and it will be done efficiently. Instead of the guy from Lusaka getting onto a Land Cruiser to go and inspect what has been blown off and then come back, buy the material from Lusaka to take it to Mungule, we are saying that that should be done in Mungule. So that is the rationalization that we are talking about. Remove the excess, the wastage that the people in Lusaka were undertaking, that the government people in the means of finance were undertaking. Take the responsibilities to the local authorities and the communities to undertake that. But in addition to that, we are saying that if we need to do a school and we need a desk in Mungule at Muchenje Primary School, where I come from, and unless there is no capacity there, the tables should be made there. And we are talking with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Science and Technology to come up with models of what should be done. And then we identify partners that are going to help us to build the capacity in the youths in those areas that would be able to provide these services. So what we are doing, we are not expanding the budget. We are actually rationalizing and consolidating, but taking the money where it matters and removing it where it didn't matter. I thank you.
Thank you, ST. Dr. Said, before you go in, I wanted to just remind everybody that if you go to the chat, I would like you to add your name and the year that you were a painter at St. Paul's. The reason we do this is to collect people that came, and then we shall be giving prizes every 3 months. So there'll be nice prizes for a person that comes to all the meetings that we have. So Dr. Said, it's all yours now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ST. I joined a bit late, but I think I've followed what you said, and that the chance also to read through the CDF guidelines. Mine first is a comment, and also maybe some kind of trying to advise certain area which needs to be attended to. My comment really is on the administration part of it. First, it's a welcome move, in my view, that the decentralization that we've talked about so much all the time could not take place because there was no incentive really for that to happen. But now the strategy that you've used, where you use the resources to take to the constituencies and districts, it means that the resources themselves now are pulling the people to go and undertake the decentralization that we needed. Now, having done that, I have no doubt in my mind that constituencies that are in urban areas and semi-urban areas, the administration part of it will be quite easy. But for constituencies that are in very much rural areas, and especially in new districts, I have in mind, I come from Rwano district, and Rwano district is one of those that you literally cannot find anything that you can be able to look at, and then everything else has to come from somewhere. So I believe that there are many other districts that are in that nature. So I would implore, for instance, that then for such kind of districts, maybe special interventions must be put in place so that you bring them to speed, because those are the districts which you'll be finding that probably that 25 million, they even fail to use it, even not even half, not because they don't want to use it, but because of capacities and many other constraints that they could have had. And then using that, you'd find that, oh, probably now in the next lot, you feel that maybe this is too much for these people. You mentioned something to do with some projects somewhere, whether some donors who could be assisting on that. I think if that is there, I think ST should be able to push for that, so that all those identified districts where you really need capacity to be built quickly, let it be built, because without that, they will be having a lot of even some of these unwarranted issues to do with corruption and all that kind of thing, because people just probably don't even know how to do it. I thought that would be something to talk about. Then the other thing is that it's about the same the act about the appointment of the committees. In rural districts, an MP is like a god. So whatever he says and whoever he puts there, always there's an element of hidden agenda, which that particular MP will have. So the selection part of it, I would really implore that you really push for that so that it can be a balanced choice. Because an MP in rural area is a god. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think on the administration, in my view, I take that basically as a comment to help us as we move this process forward. And yes, we have initially, of course, we could have said, let's look at the capacity who can absorb what and everything. But obviously, for political economic reasons, we just said, let's do a uniform arrangement. Our thinking is that as we go forward and say, for instance, Rwanda did not use their money, and then we help them build the capacity in 2023, then we'll be saying, okay, Rwanda, you can use the 2023 budget allocation, and if you can absorb, you can also have a supplementary in the 2023 budget allocation up to the amount that you didn't use in 2022, and therefore will provide that equity and fairness, taking into consideration the capacity. And obviously, I talked about the relationship that we have with the International Growth Center. They're also going to help us identify some of these gaps and come up with the strategies on how we can address some of these issues. Amending the act, of course, we are going to do that. We understand and we know why it was put like that. But we need to depoliticize this and make sure that we bring development to the people. We are hoping that in these areas where we, obviously in each of these areas, we could have a school, we could have a church, we could have some elderly people that are respected. We are hoping that then the community would choose in the absence of the straightforward areas where we are saying there's an NGO, if there's no NGO, who should come on board and everything. And we want to make it independent so that it is not just what the member of parliament says, because more often than not, members of parliament want to do a project that will win them votes, but we want to do a project that, and this is why even at the time of design, member of parliament were insistent that they wanted grants. And for them, when it reaches the time of voting and they can be able to splash money here and there, giving one another, it makes sense. But for us, from the development point of view, we would rather, instead of giving this money to political cadres to go and drink beer, would rather we have a school so that we change the narratives. Instead of talking about what have you done, we'll be talking about now everyone has got a school and it is possible. Now everyone has got a flush toilet and it is possible. Now every clinic has got a ward and it is possible. And we start looking at how do we reduce the distances. For me, I think then members of parliament will be competing on the basis of the ideas they bring to community, because community now will have the idea of, they would say, we'll do the development on our own. How are you going to lead us in achieving this development? Unlike now where communities believe the member of parliament is going to do a road, the member of parliament is going to do a school from their pocket, and the communities then will be saying, okay, here's a person who is going to do a school from their pocket and therefore let's vote for them. But they'll be voting for people that have got progressive ideas that will move the community from what they are already doing to something better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any more questions? So we've had some people that joined late. If you don't mind, just add your name to the chat with the year that you left St. Paul's. We have new people that weren't here the last time, so I'm very gratified. And we have the birthday man, not the birthday boy, for the week. Mr. Hansiva himself is here, which is nice. How are you doing, boss?
So if there are no another question, may I seek permission to leave so that I attend to people that are waiting in the foyer?
You know, you are more than welcome to do that, ST. We're very happy that you know, you came and gave us this much time of your time and explained everything in detail. And yeah, we really thank you so much.
Thank you very much all, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Felix. So yeah, Tambala, you just joined late. We're almost concluding, but I'm going to talk about the next things coming up. So this program was supposed to be co-hosted with Stephen Mushanga. So Stephen was going to talk about how the CDF implementation is going to work on the ground. So Felix gave us the overview. And so when Steve comes back, which is not today because his laptop power is not there anymore. So he's going to do the next program. And he's going to talk to us. Hopefully by then there'll be clearer, you know, rules and guidelines and whatnot. So he's going to do that. And we hope to have a meeting for, you know, maximum an hour, but this was an interesting one. So we went over. After that, we'd like to have another program. This one with Hastings Chiuye is Penta 87 on the transboundary water resources. So this will talk about how Zambia is managing its water resources in relationship with other countries that maybe share the same ground with us. So that would be another interesting one. At this point, we'll declare the meeting adjourned. These meetings happen once a month. And last year we had an very nice one actually. Makombe is here, but he gave a very good presentation on the production unit at St. Paul's. So maybe Medarido at some point you could repeat that, and hopefully people will come and listen. Also last year we had one where Dr. Saili, you were talking about I think a cooperative structure that was supposed to create. That doesn't happen yet, but maybe you could revisit that in another meeting. But the idea is to have a meeting every month end. So I don't know if there's any comments, we could close.